What's wrong with the New York Giants offense? We talk about that and more with our special guest, former NFL player turned analyst Mike Golic Jr., coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us on this hump day. Happy Wednesday to everybody. And on today's program, I'm happy to welcome in Mike Golic Jr., who is with DraftKings NFL. He is also a college football analyst and the co-host of the GoJo and Golic Podcast. And we're going to talk New York Giants today. Mike, glad to see you again.
Glad to see you too. Appreciate you having me back.
Not a problem. Welcome back. Mike, let's jump right into this because the Giants, 2-6 at the quote unquote halfway mark. I know 17 game season's technically not halfway, but we'll call it halfway. And when you look at this team, I know injuries have been a big problem, but no NFL team really wants to use that as an excuse. Where do you see the biggest issue with this team that they're just not clicking or they're not doing like they did last year?
I mean, picking just one spot is really difficult at this point, and you kind of used this last weekend as a frame of reference. I mean, you're still down your starting tackles. Justin Pugh's hammering away and fighting the good fight out there on the edge. The off-the-couch thing was funny when we did it in prime time, and it's a little bit less funny as time goes along, and that's your best option at this point for a guy that's given it a go. But Darren Waller going down with the hamstring now, so you're down another and an already limited option of pass catchers behind an offensive line that's struggling to block that had their third quarterback in there this weekend. So, the positive you take away at this point is the defense the last couple of games has started to look more like the unit that we've expected, but offensively, you got a team that struggles to block right now that really doesn't have a weapon that can get open for you. And hopefully Daniel Jones coming back can relieve some of the ills at quarterback, because nobody is designed to have success with their third stringer out there, no matter how much I like Tommy DeVito's chain.
Yeah. Now, Daniel Jones was cleared for contact. Barring anything screwy happening, he will be under center this weekend when they face the Las Vegas Raiders on the road. But Mike, let's go to Saquon for a moment here, because obviously, some debate about whether Saquon was worth the big contract. On Sunday against the Jets, he pretty much was the offense. I mean, the passing game, -9 net yards passing, which, was just mind-blowing if you think about it. But Saquon carried this offense. Do you think, since returning, Saquon has proven his value to this team? And do you think he can maybe get the big payday that he's seeking?
I think if he couldn't get it last year, I don't know why he's going to get it this year. I think that's just an unfortunate reality of the position right now, where I'm not able to really look out and forecast for any of the running backs that found themselves in that Zoom chat this offseason what it would actually take, because most of them went above and beyond what you would expect right now. You talk about the Vegas Raiders and Josh Jacobs and looking at his situation. If they weren't going to give that guy a long-term contract this offseason, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with them. But Saquon Barkley has absolutely looked like a guy that, for a lot of people I know, made them question, hey, the way the team went about dealing with him versus dealing with Daniel Jones, who you tag and who you work on a long-term deal type thing. And I think positional value probably still dictates that you made the move that you made, but Saquon's been great.
Yeah, he definitely has, coming off of that high ankle sprain that he had. Mike, just going back to the offensive line here, you mentioned they don't have their two starting tackles. Evan Neal wasn't really playing well actually before his injury, but what can they do other than, max protect? And even max protect has been a problem for them, but what can they do to maybe help that offensive line out the rest of the way if they don't get an Andrew Thomas back?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff they're already doing, chip help, max protect, putting more tight ends in to kind of lengthen edges against quality rushers, throwing stuff like that, all the little things that you would do to help on any given play anyway against better rushers. They've just got to do it against everybody. Now, against the Jets, that's one of the best defensive fronts in football. And so the problems they face there are problems a lot of people are going to face. But I think the one easy thing looking at that game is, Daniel Jones coming back and all of his athletic gifts. Tyrod Taylor's a hell of an athlete at this point, but just an older one and a guy who's not quite as fleet of foot as Daniel. And so you're going to need a quarterback who's got the ability to buy time and erase some of those mistakes. And we know for Daniel at times that's, led to turnovers in the past, which is a bit of the worry, but you got to have a quarterback who's going to continue to do those things to help bail his line out. Daniel Jones being a more consistent run threat, even if it's through drop back passing where he's just taken off after the first couple reads and scrambles, I think does settle the pass rush down some, because then you become so concerned with just keeping him in the pocket. But they're doing a lot of those things. The problem ends up becoming, Patricia, for the Giants is, you're going to do all that stuff, and then you've got even fewer guys out in the routes right now, and you don't have a receiver that can really get open. You don't really have, watching them versus the Jets kind of was enlightening, because for the Jets, they're not in that much better of a situation, right? Both teams led by their defense. Both teams were playing backup quarterbacks, but the Jets got guys that get open. They got Garrett Wilson. They got other players on that team that can actually get loose for their quarterback, even if the quarterback can't always supply them the ball. And even if the offensive line's not always protecting as well, there aren't a lot of places, especially on the perimeter, places that really bend the field where the Giants can find a win right now.
Yeah, you mentioned Daniel Jones. He continues to divide the fan base. Half the fan base wants him gone. Half the fan base is defending him. You can make a case that he hasn't played as well this year as he did last year, although how much of that is a result of the offensive line and, as you mentioned, the receivers not getting open and whatnot. When you look at Daniel Jones, though, give me an honest assessment. Is he playing worse than he was last year? And if so, what do you see as the biggest contributing factors within his game?
Yeah, it's really hard to at times always pull out the quarterback's responsibility versus the rest of the offense. Remember, we went through this last year. Matthew Stafford, known really good quarterback. There's not worries there. And Matthew Stafford looked really rough last year because they were behind one of the most injured offensive lines in recent football memory out in Los Angeles. And so that's kind of what I think of. So much of what was predicated this year for Daniel, and so much of the conversation is based on expectation. There was an expectation based on the payday that he received that Daniel Jones was going to take a step forward and shoulder more of the load in the offense. The problem is the offense didn't really add a ton of weapons to the arsenal that were going to have meaningful help with that. And then you crack the foundation. This was a team that got by running the football last year and playing sound defense, and that wasn't the case to start the season. So I for the most part, see a lot of the same stuff with Daniel as last year. It's just with more opportunities where he has to affect the game, he hasn't been able to transcend the talent or lack thereof around him at certain points. And I think that's where a lot of the friction is.
Are they maybe asking him to do a little bit more than they did last year? I know last year he was, or historically, he's pretty much been a one read type of quarterback. Are they asking him to maybe get out of that mode? Or they maybe looking for him to do more than what he did last year?
Well, yeah, that's the idea in theory. But again, then when your guys up front aren't as good as blocking as they were last year, just because personnel issues have happened, and you still look out there at that wide receiver core and you're young and now you're injured again with Darren Waller, it's all right, there's not a ton of places to go with this. So you want to ask him to do more and develop a phase of the offense that you didn't really stock the cupboard on this offseason sufficiently enough. I get that we think the quarterback is just supposed to overcome all of that stuff, but I think we see time and time again, we're having this discussion with Brock Purdy in San Francisco right now as a couple of their key weapons are out. Brock Purdy's a very good quarterback. He's been sensational since he took over there for the 49ers, but he's not one of the 4 or 5 aliens in the sport, the Mahomes, Allens, Burrows of the world, Lamar Jackson this season, who, man, when stuff breaks down and you got a few guys hurt, they're capable of doing the extra effort stuff that makes a difference for a team. Daniel's not that guy. That I don't think is why you paid him or why you signed him, with the expectation to be that guy. You expect him to be better than you've seen so far this season in certain regards, but I do think at times it becomes this binary when we talk about quarterbacks where you're either expected to do that or you're a bum around your team. And there really aren't many guys that can do that. Even very good quarterbacks fall short of that standard if that's what we're going to make it.
Hey, Giant fans, our partner at eBay Motors has teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long, with players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. This week, Vinny is eyeing Falcons wide receiver Drake London. London had a rather quiet week 8 against the Titans secondary as he caught only 5 passes for 55 yards, but he should be targeted to get on track with a much bigger game against the vulnerable Vikings secondary in week 9. With a potential quarterback change looming to Taylor Heineke, Atlanta should be more of an effective downfield passing team. London could also see some high volume in this game. And Giant fans, while Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football helps you win your fantasy championship, know that eBay Motors knows the championship team is all about each player being a perfect fit. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. You know, we talk about the offensive line. It's 5 guys making up one unit. But it's been said that Andrew Thomas, the stud left tackle, when he comes back, assuming he does come back, that will fix a lot of issues. Do you agree with that, or are there still flaws on that offensive line? Going back to the original starting group of Thomas at left tackle, Bredesen at left guard. Now it's going to be Justin Pugh moving forward. I think Schmitz at center, the rookie, Glowinski at right guard, and Evan Neal at right tackle.
So I think having one exceptional player on an offensive line can help because it makes your ability to allocate resources for the rest of the line a lot easier. Like when you got one, I played college football with Zach Martin, who's going to go on and be one of the 3 best guards to ever play pro football, but he played left tackle for us. So there was a security in knowing, all right, Zach's going to block the guy on the left side there. You're not going to have to worry about that one-on-one. And so what does that mean? We can slide everybody else my way. I was playing right guard, so I like to have a little bit of help coming my way. And so now you can focus the slide that way. You can ID protection that way. You can just send more bodies towards the guys that need a little bit more help, especially as Evan Neal right now still going through growing pains at his position and some of the other guys that just aren't Andrew Thomas. So it can allow you to do some different things that definitely help the rest of the group in the run game. Having a guy that you're used to working with or were before, who you had all that time under task with last season and in the offseason potentially. All that stuff shows up in certain places that can absolutely be helpful. I don't think it's an overnight fix, but it obviously makes you better in ways that are going to be pretty easy to see pretty quickly.
All right, now, Mike, I want to talk about the Giants defense. The last few weeks, that defense has really picked up its performance. Kayvon Thibodeau, a guy who was another one who drew kind of, some criticism from New York sports talk, having a whale of a stretch here. What's been the turning point for that defense? They did get off to a slow start. They've been playing better. What do you see as the biggest turning point for them?
I think up front, they look like themselves again. And, it's so weird to look at a defense and have the first thing you notice be the nose guard. But Dexter Lawrence, every play, he's in somebody's face in the backfield. The guy's a monster. And that has a direct benefit for guys like Kayvon that make their living on the edge. Like we always hear during the pre-draft coverage about guys who can run the hoop. And you think about a guy's ability to bend around a corner because usually you're thinking your path to the quarterback's going to be circuitous. You're going to have to beat the offensive tackle and then kind of get around and back up because most quarterbacks step up in the pocket. That's kind of the way most passing plays are designed. But when you've got a guy like Dexter, who's a push every play up the middle of the defense there, now the quarter's looking for that safety valve in front of him and it's nowhere to be found. And that line becomes a little bit more straightforward for guys like Kayvon on the edge, who now can just focus on turning and burning when they pin their ears back. And so I think the foundation of the defense has always been, Dexter Lawrence. I remember talking to Kyle Rudolph, was one of my old teammates who spent that 1 year with the Giants, and just talked about one of the freakiest athletes and one of the most powerful human beings he's ever seen in Dexter Lawrence. You look around for wins on this Giants team, where they might have better personnel than some of the teams they're going up against, and they're going to walk into pretty much every game with the edge at nose tackle because of that dude. So it's insane to say in some ways, but he really sets the foundation that allows so much of the rest of that defense to succeed when they're playing at a really high level.
Now, I don't want to take anything away from Dexter Lawrence's game because I agree with you. He's been playing lights out. The Giants, though, just shipped out Leonard Williams to Seattle for a nice haul, 2nd-round pick in next year's draft, and then a 5th-rounder in the following year's draft. How much of an effect do you think Leonard Williams had on Dexter's game, and how do you anticipate maybe Dexter's game or how opponents attack him changing now that Leonard Williams won't be in there?
I think it always helps some to have another really productive big guy in the middle, especially for the Giants with how much they like to cover down and, cover up the inside 3 on the offensive line, get a bunch of big bodies out there in the middle and having guys that have that pass rush wiggle the way that Leonard Williams did. But I still think, especially, in the run game for him, it's always going to be Dex is going to be the guy you're getting double teams on. Like Leonard wasn't taking double teams away from Dex if we're going order of operation for the offensive line. If you've got push coming to shove there, quite literally shove. But I think they've got some other big bodies that can certainly roll through to offset that. Also, you factor in, in this defense with Wink, he's always going to want to be throwing the kitchen sink anyway on money downs. And Dex is a guy that doesn't necessarily have to come off the field there, which is a huge advantage. And so I think it'll be some effect, but I think that was a calculated move by the Giants, understanding, hey, getting some capital going towards next year, getting a little bit of financial relief, all these things sort of trump what's happening on the field right now because they've seen there's going to be only so much success this season with the amount of injury they weathered, how much time their quarterbacks missed already. So I don't think it wrecks you in the short term here, and it obviously now affords you the opportunity to with a little bit more flexibility long term.
In the history of Wink Martindale's defenses as defensive coordinator, I don't think he's ever had a pass rusher with double-digit sacks. Kayvon Thibodeau is knocking on that door. He's got plenty of time to make it, but he's on pace to become the first to reach that. What is it about how they've been deploying him that has set him up for success as opposed to maybe, pass rushers in Wink's defense?
Well, I think, and I wouldn't have the Rolodex in front of me of pass Wink pass rushers, but a lot of it's just time and place. Like Wink throws so much at you as an offense. And I think we're seeing around the NFL right now, right? Defensive renaissance across the league. A lot of that, I was talking to Mina Kimes over at ESPN yesterday about so many teams around the league using what you call simulated pressures, where you're bringing 4 guys, but they're coming from different spots. They're coming from all up looks. And so from an offensive line standpoint, defenses like Winks force you to set a protection, force you to make a decision, and then their goal is to make you wrong every time. Their goal is to give you a look that says, all right, well, we need to slide the bulk of our guys right, and then all of a sudden you've got galaxy brain stuff coming from the left side of the group. And all of it, every blitz ever formulated is predicated on getting guys one-on-one matchups, right? The easiest version of that is when you see 5 all up on the offensive line. You go, all right, well, our group up front, we're usually calling 5 down or something like that. We're each a little one-on-one man block on an island. And for a guy like Kayvon, when you've got other guys on the interior, like we talked about, that people have to worry about and focus attention on, they can't spend as much time with you. And so you get a few more one-on-one opportunities, especially when you've got a coach that likes to blitz this often. You combine that with a guy that is a stellar player. I mean, there's a reason you picked him where he was. This is a lot of the guy that we saw at Oregon, the ability that was on display there. And so, right place, right time, and certainly a scheme that's going to get you a ton of one-on-one matchups, which is all you can ask for as a pass rusher. We see around the league, so many teams have to devote resources to some of the space aliens that operate on the perimeter of defenses. Got to get a tight end to touch them every play. Got to get a running back running their way. Got to mix up the bag because these guys, if you let them just go straight forward the whole time, they're going to get home. Kayvon's not quite in that upper crust of pass rusher yet, but he's good enough to where with a bunch of one-on-one matchups and a bunch of other dudes you got to worry about, he can get home and make some things happen.
With that Giants defensive secondary going to the youth movement, what have you seen from that group that, has you thinking that this is going to be a formidable group moving forward?
Just some new faces in there. They seem like, and again, in Wink's defense, we talk about you're going to be asked to play man coverage. You're going to be asked to go out there and hold up in some pressure situations. And so, again, they played well by and large for the most part, going up against Zach Wilson, who's still, outside of that 1/2 against the Chiefs, not really been a stellar quarterback. Won't be the ultimate litmus test for me, but, got some young guys in there that you can be excited about and try and break into this, who are also used to playing in a world. I heard someone, I think it was Dominique Foxworth, talking about this the other day. Young corners growing up right now are kind of used to playing within the very strict limitations of what modern NFL defenses are allowed to do based on the rules. And so starting to get more of those guys in the building and fitting into this system, which again asks a lot of them, is probably pretty important.
Hey, Giant fans, if you want to secure tickets to your favorite concert shows and sporting events without the stress, you need to check out Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets right up until the day of the event. With amazing deals on last-minute tickets and their best prices guaranteed, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. With Game Time, you not only get the lowest prices guaranteed, you also get a clear image of your seat before you make the purchase. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So go ahead and snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. Again, that promo code is LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Mike, as a former player, when you prepare your butt off for a game and you suffer a gut punch loss like what the Giants did against the Jets, can you come back from that? What is it going to take mentally to come back from that, to say, okay, we got to go through this all over again. We got another game to play, and, this one got away from us. I mean, what's the mindset? What's the approach, do you think, that these guys need to take?
I actually thought as a player, it was a lot easier to get over hard losses than it is as a fan now or an analyst. Like, I grew up a Notre Dame fan, and then I played at Notre Dame, and now I'm just a fan again now. So I feel like I've got some access to the fan experience because I am totally irrational watching that football team. And when I was a player, I thought I had changed and would be better as a fan on the back end, because as a player, you realize, like, I don't get to dwell on that. We're going to take what we can from it. We're going to watch the tape from it. Yeah, losing stinks and it's never any fun. And when they start to add up like this, especially early on, I think the more daunting challenge just becomes finding the light going forward and looking out forward. It's less, oh, this loss affected me so much, and more, all right, well, I'm looking out at the rest of the schedule now, and maybe the cumulative effect of those body blows are, I'm not seeing a lot of wins anymore. And that can start to be where the dread creeps in. And that's the kind of stuff that maybe because of that, you start thinking more in self-preservation. Maybe because of that, you're preparing a little bit less during the week, because you're like, all right, what is this really netting me on the back end? But I think in general, players are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for on the outside. We all live and die with it because that's all we've got is the result week in and week out. They got to go back to work, and they got to try and figure out, all right, game plan wise, how are we going to defeat a totally new opponent with a totally different challenge? How am I going to get my body ready to go back and play? There's so many things that you got to do that are, as cliche as it sounds, just the 5 minutes in the air in front of your face for that next day, that you don't really get time to dwell on how bad that hurt. Some of them stink. Some of them physically hurt a little bit more, but you learn to turn the page pretty quick because you have to, because this sport will literally kick your ass if you don't. So there's not really another option.
Mike, when you look at the job Brian Daboll has done, last year, the coach of the year, this year, the fortunes have flipped again. Injuries were not expected. Some of the performances or lack thereof, maybe not expected, but you look at some of the decisions and some of the questions that, have popped up. Has Daboll grown, in your opinion, in this role, or is he kind of taken a step back?
I would say it's probably just like held space so far this year. Like we last year saw him and we're all so wowed by what he was able to do with the resources, how different it looked than what they had done in Buffalo during his time there with Josh Allen and with the pieces they had available there. And so looking around and saying, all right, that's not what I have here. Let me take the best use of it, make this more of a running thing, yada, yada, yada. All of that paid off. I think this year I'm willing to extend a measure of grace just because so much has gone wrong so early. And we talk about it all the time, like the X's and O's, Jimmy's and Joe's lines, but it's true. Most good coaches will tell you, I'm good because we've got really good players out there, and I'm good because they're performing well and they're healthy. The best teams in this league, especially like the NFL, where the rosters are as small as they are, you're so much more dependent on health than almost every other level of the sport and every other sport out there. And so I'm willing to say, hey, I believe based on what I saw last year, the New York Giants have a really good coach. And I think this year you've just found a situation that would frustrate and confound most coaches in the league. And so I'm willing to basically kind of say it's held steady. And I'm interested to see as they start to, and trades like the Leonard Williams ones are a good example, as they start to amass resources, as they start to have an eye for what the plan's going to be in the future, since this season looks like even in this year's NFC that it might be lost pretty early on here. I still think this is a guy I'm excited to see what he does with those at the helm.
Do you think the success they had last year in the first year of Shane and Daboll maybe set them back in retrospect? Because now it's like, this is probably the year they should have had last year.
Well, I think this is a good reminder that most people don't pay attention. And this happened with the Vikings too, but the Vikings and the Giants were both the poster children for close wins are a really bad indicator of future success. Like that always tends to regress to the mean. And so hopefully everyone in New York has learned about the term regression, because we knew it was coming the way that you won games last year and the way that teams like the Vikings won games last year. It's not sustainable. And so the team was always somewhere in the middle of that. But to your point, that doesn't matter to the outside world that just sees results. And so I don't know if it set them back, but it definitely put expectations in a place that probably weren't going to be the healthiest, especially in New York City going into year 2 of a program, knowing some of the constraints there. But I do think it highlights that, hey, in the offseason, you probably could have done more, especially on the perimeter and finding weapons and securing. I think it's going to create a bit of a sense of urgency in some areas going forward where, yeah, obviously offensive line is going to be the thing you circle multiple times on the sheet, really got to get this down. But I think you've got to find more people that can get you a win across the board. And you've tried to do it down the spine of your offense. That's worked with some success with Saquon and with Darren when he's been healthy on the field. But I think in general, it's going to put more of that focus on the perimeter and continuing to find game breakers, because Daniel's going to be here again next year. As much as people might not like him, the way that they've structured this, that contract was a 2-year deal in the way that it was laid out. And so you're going to have him there again next year trying to make this work. And it's going to be incumbent on everybody in this organization to do everything they can to put him in the best position to succeed.
That being said, speaking of Daniel, given the injury issue with him, if you're Joe Shane, do you take a quarterback if you have an opportunity to get one? If you're in the top, say, 10 or 5 draft picks, do you go for a quarterback or do you go elsewhere?
I think if you can, in this year's draft, if you can get Caleb Williams or Drake May, you probably got to think long and hard about doing that. But if it's any of the rest of the quarterbacks, and there's a lot of good ones, college football is deep with quarterbacks this year. There's going to be a lot of exciting guys like Michael Penix and Bo Nix that we talk about as we get forward towards the spring. But I'm not sure for those guys at this juncture for New York, it would be worth the potential capital in that round to go out there and make something happen. So, I think a lot of this is going to depend on where you end up and in what range of the first round this year, because we know some of the other names there. You think about offensive tackle, there's going to be some good prospects. Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. Notre Dame's got a great tackle in Joe Alt on their left side. Wide receiver wise, it's a class led by Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, you'd imagine it's going to be quarterback Marvin Harrison Jr. to start this draft. However that organizes up there, and then after the fact, it's kind of going to go from there. So that's an interesting question, because this year, I think as much as anything, the quarterback prospects, the top 2 are so compelling that anybody who finds themselves in that range, I think no matter what their situation is, Chicago kind of in a similar spot, trying to figure out what they're going to do with Justin Fields this season. He's been injured some. You've had the Tyson Bagent experiment over the last couple of games. Everybody who's got a quarterback who might have a year left or 2 or is on the younger side and might think about restarting that clock, if they're in range of those guys, I think is going to take a look.
And then finally, Mike, this Giant team still looks like it has a lot of holes on certain positions, the depth and whatnot. If you're Joe Shane and you're making a preliminary to-do list for the offseason, where are you going first in terms of fixing the roster?
Wide receiver. I mean, wide receiver and offensive line. Andrew Thomas is going to help a lot. I might be in the limited camp, and this is my holdover as a college football analyst that says, man, you saw how long it took Andrew Thomas to really latch on and become the player he is now. I want to believe, because of what I saw from Evan Neal in college, that might be the case. But sometimes, other factors can creep in there. So I think offensive line and then a premier skill weapon on the perimeter would probably be the place that I start for this team. Just because, again, your charge right now, unless you get in range and want to do something crazy at quarterback, which, again, I just don't think financially is in the cards for the Giants right now, the way that they structured this commitment with Daniel. I think your job is to make life as good as you can for the quarterback, and you draw a straight line out. It goes through the offensive line. And I think as long as whatever happens with Saquon in that backfield, you've got to get somebody who can bend the field on the outside for this guy that Daniel can rely on.
All right, Mike, great stuff as always. I appreciate the insight. He is the host of GoJo and Golic Podcast. He's also with DraftKings NFL and is a college football analyst. He is Mike Golic Jr., who just amazing stuff. I really, really appreciate your insight and your time coming on with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. It's Crossover Thursday. We're going to talk Giants Raiders, who match up this weekend. Don't miss it. We will see you again tomorrow, Giant fans.